Welcome to another edition of CrossTalk. It is the 7th Plymouth District with State Representative Rep Diehl, who is here in studio. Sir.
Kevin, nice to see you again.
Welcome back to your show.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you for letting it be casual taping today.
It is.
This is nice.
It's like a casual Friday taping.
Well, with all the heat, finally the weather's getting nicer again. This is a nice little break for the first time.
Truth be told is that I didn't have a tie that matched the suit. So I asked him, I said, please, can we do it without a tie and call it Casual Friday? And he said, yeah.
Sounds great.
We'll do that. We'll go with that. It's been a while since we've chatted, a couple of weeks anyways.
Yep.
We are past at least the House budget process.
Yes, this is the, just like everybody knows, town meeting time, this is the time when not only do they vote for some new officers for the town, but they also vote at town meeting for budget. So we've just passed that in all three of the towns I represent, Abington, Whitman, and East Bridgewater. And I know in Whitman, there was also the override, which ended up passing and funding some of the needs for the ambulances, for the fire department, but specifically a lot of ambulance needs, staffing an additional firefighter, which they hadn't added a new shift person, I think, for 50 years or something like that. And so the other thing too is I know I spoke at town meeting and mentioned the fact that there are a lot of regulations that are still coming down from the Affordable Care Act. We have not, despite what people think, the government has not switched down in DC from the ACA over to a new health care yet. It's yet to go through the Senate.
In the Senate, yeah.
Right, and so there's still some regulations that are funneling through from the federal government through the state as regulations for Whitman firefighter equipment that they need, and certain ways of dealing with patients as they transport them, as to where they should be transported, not necessarily the emergency room every time. So things are changing a little bit, and it looks like the town was able to approve and give some help to the fire department for those needs.
As we kind of sit here and watch what happens in the Senate, they're kind of debating and arguing what they're going to do for amendments for their version of the budget. What's your take on the fiscal 2018 budget as a whole? I mean, starting from when the governor passed it down and then the House did their thing. Give me your thoughts.
So one of the big things is it's a $40.3 billion budget that came out of the House. The Senate is looking at, I think, an increase. We were able to once again increase local aid and increase Chapter 70 funding, not to the level that we had done in the previous year. I know with Chapter 70 right. Per pupil spending, we had gotten it up from a $20 increase by the governor to $55. This year we were hoping to set at least $50 or $55 as a minimum. It ended up being $30 million, but $30 per pupil increase. But part of the problem is that we are now in our third year also of revenues coming into the state not matching what the state budget is setting. So they wanted to be conservative now, and perhaps the Senate will take it up and see if they could increase that number. It just depends on what the April numbers are that come in as far as tax revenue. It always takes a little while to figure out what the final amounts are. And usually capital gains is something that kind of comes in around tax season that gives us some sort of boost. But it's something that you can't count on until later in the year, which is why the House and Senate always take a long time to get that final number to towns, which the town always wants their cherry sheet numbers.
Oh, yeah.
And we always try to give them as best an approximation as possible, but really it's a lot of the tax revenue. We have to figure out exactly how that comes in before. So the budget usually isn't passed until sometime in beginning of July, and sometimes there's even extension into July, which I hate. But again, it's kind of the way the process has become, and it's just sort of the way it goes.
Any bills or anything that you've co-authored or signed on to that made it into the House version that's been passed on?
Yeah, I was actually pretty pleased, and it's something that I think people probably didn't realize for a long time was a loophole going on here, but I was able to co-sponsor an amendment that allows daycare facilities to check the employee data before they hire somebody and determine if they are a level 1 sex offender. Okay, and this is something that you would think would have been something that they could have had information on a long time ago, right. But it was something that it was just kind of missing from the law. So we were able to get that in there. Now there was some other things like trying to roll back the sales tax from 6.25% to 5%, which I think would have been an economic stimulus for our state. I know people say, how does that make sense? When you reduce a tax, the state would get more revenue. But the fact is that when you do reduce a tax, sometimes you spur more spending. And in fact, there always was for years. In August, we would do a sales tax holiday weekend, right? And this last year, we did not do a sales tax holiday weekend. And in fact, this year, I tried to reinstall with an amendment sales tax holiday weekend and actually apply it to restaurants as well, because, you know, it's retailers who get that nice bump in August sales when there is that tax holiday, but restaurants never are factored in when it comes to that tax holiday. And I said, why not allow them to get a little bump in the summer when they also see a decline in people necessarily going out. I know a lot of people like to grill once the weather is nice, and that usually affects restaurants. Put that in there. It didn't pass, but again, it was something that was worth at least trying to help our restaurant industry with.
Well, I'm sure that Dave Andelman of the Andelman family, and I know that they have a little bit of a lobbying firm for local businesses, for businesses. That was one of the things that they had been pushing for.
Yeah.
Was to have. I don't think it was going to be for a weekend. I think they wanted to have like a tax-free week
Yes,
for restaurants.
actually, that's what it was. So I was pushing for a sales tax holiday weekend and then a restaurant-free week, a tax-free week as well.
That would have been fantastic.
It would have been. You could sample all the different restaurants that you like in your area.
I would have eaten out.
Yeah. By the way, nice new restaurants popping up. Sorrel up on Route 18 in Abington is a new restaurant for people to try out. I haven't made it myself, but I've heard it's got some good food there. You know, it's nice to see some investment back in our communities, some restaurants and businesses kind of opening up, and that's a good sign, you know, usually for the economy.
I know that recently there was a little bit of a press conference held in Whitmantown Park that you are going to, you're doing an exploratory run for U.S. Senate.
Yeah, so this has been an interesting period of time for me and my family. You know, I think folks know that I was supporting Donald Trump in the presidential election. I was the only Republican in Massachusetts who endorsed him, and he ended up obviously winning the presidency. And, you know, it was interesting because I had folks talk to me afterwards that were involved in the campaign saying, have you thought about maybe running for the U.S. Senate? I mean, of course, you know, Senator Elizabeth Warren is up for re-election in 2018, and she had become a very outspoken critic of the president since he's been in office, and some might say an obstructionist of what he's trying to get done to help America. And so I started talking to some folks that I'd worked with up on Beacon Hill. They seemed to have a positive view of it. I talked to my family. Ultimately, I think my wife and kids said, you know, this might be something worth trying. And then I talked to folks on the campaign trail that I'd worked with on ballot questions like the gas tax indexing, where we repealed that and saved taxpayers $2 billion. And again, a lot of them felt that maybe that we could put together a campaign. So what we did just a few weeks ago was announced an exploratory committee so that we can test the waters to see if this is something that the voters of Massachusetts might go for. And so what I've been doing is we set up a website, which is diehlforsenate.org, D-I-E-H-L for senate.org. No, I'm sorry, .com, not org. And diehlforsenate.com. And people can go there and weigh in on how they feel about the run. And then I've also been making a lot of events, you know, in the evenings and on weekends, going to around the state to talk to groups about the idea of running for office. And so far the response has been pretty positive, and I think they look at the work I've been trying to do on Beacon Hill as something that it's not necessarily about party, it's about trying to do what's right for the people of Massachusetts, and that's always been what I felt when I first ran for office was important. And believe me, when I was supporting Donald Trump, it wasn't like he was a popular candidate, generally speaking, but what I saw was that he was trying to do things that both, I think, Democrats and Republicans were saying couldn't be done,
right.
And now he's, you know, trying to make those efforts down in D.C., whether it's making sure that we tighten up our borders, you know, for immigration issues, or whether it's creating a better business environment, or whether it's making stronger partnerships with foreign policy overseas, and he's, you know, on a trip doing that right now. I think he's trying to prove that everything he promised when he ran for office he would deliver on, and so, you know, that's what I'd like to do, is just make sure that the folks know what I stand for, what I've been able to accomplish on Beacon Hill, inside the chamber and outside the chamber, and also at the same time, you know, try to contrast myself with who's the current U.S. Senator and her track record and or lack thereof, because I think that we certainly could do better.
Talk to me about what's the difference between launching an exploratory look at a run as opposed to a full-on run where you're like, I'm running. What's the difference?
I think the difference is, first of all, you know, an exploratory committee does allow you to fundraise, so we are trying to, you know, see if we're able to get donations and the support you would need to run against somebody who has spent the bulk of her time in office fundraising for herself and for a lot of Democrat candidates across the country. That seems to be the bulk of the work I've seen out of her office. She also has done a lot of work writing 2 books in office, and she's made $1.6 million on book deals, which is, again, great for herself. But what I'm trying to do is, with the exploratory committee, like I said, see if we can fundraise, and then if we decide that we have the resources available, say yes, put the team together, and actually start working full time on running for the U.S. Senate. So it's something that's going to be a big decision. I'm not ready to make it anytime soon, but it's something that clearly I would need to decide on, in a relatively short period of time in order to make sure that we are able to get the message out there and really fully, effectively go after trying to win that Senate seat.
Is there a financial goal that you also try to reach as well? And it's something that if you're able to reach a certain
Do you have
plateau.
some pocket change you're looking to get rid of here? Or something?
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, it's you want to obviously, for me, it's trying to raise a strong 6-figure amount would be very important by mid to late summer. And the other thing too is to also gauge how many people donate to you. It's not necessarily the amount that you're asking people to give. It's just the sort of the quantity of people that say, hey, look, I know who you are. I know what your record is. I know what you stand for, and I believe in what you could bring to the U.S. Senate as a representative for us. So that's really the message, is trying to, again, reach out to individuals on a one-to-one basis and then see if they would be willing to contribute. And if we sort of can gauge the response on that, we'll see if we want to go forward.
Do you liken this to, I almost kind of think of like somebody who's going to run a marathon. They're usually building up, they're running sprints. It may not be the full 26 miles, but maybe they'll run a 15-mile run one weekend. Maybe the next weekend they'll do 20. When you did the gas tax,
well, I was just going to say, we did a successful statewide campaign, and we did everything other than, it wasn't my name on the ballot. It was a yes to repeal on the ballot. And by the way, if you look at a ballot, right, Governor Baker was right here at the top, and he ended up winning. The gas tax ballot question ended up winning by 50,000 votes more than the governor had gotten for the governor's race. So we actually ran such an effective campaign, and we were outspent 31 to 1. $3 million were spent against us.
Yep.
But it was getting out there very early, informing people about the fact that not only did their gas tax go up, but it was indexed to go up automatically every year without a vote, which was a principle that, first of all, in a state where there's no taxation without representation, we just felt that's the only tax that would go up automatically every year. Just seemed like the wrong thing to do. Secondly, it was handing the Department of Transportation a blank check every year without any accountability.
Right.
And the biggest thing was we proved that the Department of Transportation also spends 4 times the national average on per road mile maintenance, which is, we spend $675,000 per road mile per year to maintain our roads, and they're not in great shape. And the national average is $145,000 per year. New Hampshire does it at the national average and has great roads. We know that we weren't getting the right bang for our buck with the gas tax to begin with. Why should that be going up when we're not getting what we expect from government? So we made that case, and we certainly were pleased to win the issue, and it became, actually, we won a national award.
The Polly
Award, exactly.
Polly.
So we've run a statewide campaign, and in this case, it just happens to be that I would be the name on the ballot, but the issues are still the same. It's trying to make sure that people are aware of the representation they're getting down in Washington D.C. versus what I think I could provide to them, as a contrast.
Early on, how have you been greeted in regards to being somebody who's considering a run against Elizabeth Warren? What are people saying to you, and what are some of their concerns that they want you to address if you're successful?
Well, so what's really interesting about the Senate race is that Scott Brown obviously won in 2010, and then he lost in 2012. So people say, well, if Scott couldn't hold the seat, how can you hold it? Well, the fact is that the year that Scott Brown ran for re-election, he was actually still transitioning into that office during that 2-year period he was running. He actually got 3 bills passed that he filed, and Elizabeth Warren has had 1 bill passed, not even related to Massachusetts. So he was actually a very effective senator in just 2 years under President Obama, whereas, again, Senator Warren not only hasn't had bills passed that help our state, but even voted against a bill called the 21st Century Cures Act. And people may not know what this bill is, but it just actually came to help Massachusetts. Just 2 weeks ago, the governor announced in a press release that 21st Century Cures Act just allocated $12 million to Massachusetts to fight the opioid crisis, all right? But what that bill originally was designed for also was to end terminal illnesses like cancer. It had Joe Biden Vice President Joe Biden's Cancer Moonshot funding in there, which is increased funding from the National Institute of Health, or NIH. And in Massachusetts, we have the world's leading research hospitals that get a ton of NIH funding. So that bill was going to help Massachusetts research hospitals with jobs, and it was going to help end terminal cancer. Every Democrat in the congressional delegation for Massachusetts, all 9 congressmen and women, and Senator Markey voted for it. Elizabeth Warren voted against it, and now again we're coming to find out that it had funding in it that we just received in Massachusetts. So these are the kind of votes that people need to be aware of, and I think people are very surprised to hear about that. They're surprised, I think, also to know that, again, she's written 2 books while in office and made a significant amount of personal money. And at the same time, decries the fact that college costs for kids are so high, and yet still teaches that one course at Harvard for $350,000, and is saying that kids can't afford college. Of course not when you're getting paid like that as a professor teaching one course. So look, I think there's a bit about her record that we certainly need to talk about. I mean, I would just say the other interesting thing was a few weeks ago, it was Equal Pay Awareness Day, I think, and there were, Elizabeth Warren was talking about the fact that women generally don't make as much as men in the workplace. Well, come to find out, not in her office either. She ends up paying, it turns out, 71% to women versus what a men in her office make. So, I think she became very quiet about that issue afterwards. It's time for someone who has shown that they can win, like I said, on issues inside the State House and outside the State House when it comes to being passionate and working towards the goals that we as citizens of Massachusetts need.
How many pairs of shoes have you worn out since you've gone out there and began indulging in this exploratory campaign?
I'm on my first pair, but I can tell you that just like back in 2009, 2010 when I first ran for office, there was not a doorstep left unturned by the time I was done going out and campaigning. This will be the same thing. I'm putting a lot of miles on my car. I guess maybe I should have picked up Scott Brown's truck and kept using that. But I think he's taken that to New Zealand with him, so I don't know if that's even available. But no, I am basically spending a lot of time in the evenings making sure I go out and talk to a lot of folks. And they seem to, again, like I said, understand that not only do I think we have a campaign that can win, it's also, if you look at the history in Massachusetts, Scott Brown won, like I was saying before, the gas tax ballot question won. Even Charlie Baker, a Republican, won here in Massachusetts. It's not unthinkable to say that, Republicans can win in Massachusetts, and I think it's also becoming more evident, especially with Donald Trump. 20,000 Democrats unenrolled to be able to vote for Donald Trump in the primary in Massachusetts. Now in Pennsylvania, 90,000 Democrats unenrolled, and he flipped that state. I'm not saying Massachusetts is flipping for Donald Trump. What I am saying, though, is that there is more awareness of the pragmatic nature of politicians and what they're delivering, and if they're going down to D.C., are they going down there for the right reasons? And Elizabeth Warren had a poll come out about her not too long ago. WBUR, radio station in Boston, found out that 46% of the people about 3 months ago responded 46 would rather see a new senator, 44% would vote to keep her. Now, if you're at 44% voting to keep you as a progressive Democrat out of Massachusetts, there's got to be some disconnect there. And again, I think people are aware. When she was doing her book tour around the country, she was talking on talk radio shows, on morning shows, television shows, right? About, I think she called anybody who voted for Trump part of a stew of racists. She went to the NAACP dinner and spoke about how the police officers are continuing to terrorize African Americans. I think that divisive talk is not what people want to see down in D.C., and it's also very clear she seems to be positioning herself to run for president in 2020 against Donald Trump. I don't think Massachusetts citizens want to be used as a stepping stone for another political career. I think they expect, like Ted Kennedy, who was a liberal lion, big partisan, but when elections were over, he knew when it was time to work with a Republican president and with a Republican governor to deliver for Massachusetts. I think that's what they expect.
Okay. Let's bring things back here to the Commonwealth. Pending legislation, something that we talked about before the cameras were rolling, and this is regarding the sheriffs here in Massachusetts. Could you kind of give me the details on what it's going to do in regards to their working with immigration officials?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So I'm sure you're aware, there's been a big issue in Massachusetts. A lot of cities or towns have tried to float the idea of becoming a sanctuary city, and for people who are listening who don't know what that necessarily means, it's the municipality, whether it's a mayor or a board of selectmen or whatever, they're the ones who hire local law enforcement. Your local police chief is not elected, they are appointed and hired. And so those towns can tell their police chief to not work with immigration officials or ICE officials, immigration and customs enforcement officials. They can tell them not to work with them, not to share data. But what's happening is this is playing out on a national stage as well. Jeff Sessions, who's head of is the Attorney General for the United States, is saying that cities or towns that do this are potentially putting themselves at liability for losing federal funding if they do that status. Well, there was a big uproar to say, well, how can you use federal funds as a threat to cities and towns? Well, now what's happening is, ironically, up on Beacon Hill, we'll be hearing legislation that's coming out that would tell sheriff's departments that they put funding at risk if they work with ICE officials to act as detaining, sort of holding cells for federal prisoners, and in this case, illegal immigrants with a criminal background. Now, there is no ICE sweeps for illegal immigrants in Massachusetts. There are ICE arrests that are made for people who are here illegally, like MS-13 gangs who are guilty of murder or drug trafficking. If they're caught, they need to be held in a jail cell until their immigration hearing and possible deportation can happen. Well, in Massachusetts, Sheriff Tom Hodgson out of Bristol County, for example, has been one of the sheriffs that accepts and has a whole special detention area for federal immigration and detainees, okay? Now that, since 2011, has brought in revenue of $47 million to the state, and it has only had an expenditure of about $8 million over those years to operate.
Good numbers.
They actually are bringing in revenue, a significant amount of revenue that goes into the general fund in Massachusetts, and yet what's happening is there's legislation that's saying that the state doesn't want resources being tied up by sheriff's departments to work with ICE officials on this. Well, it doesn't square up because we're actually generating revenue by working with ICE because of the money they pay for us to hold these prisoners, right? So anyway, there's going to be a debate about this, and I think that it's interesting because it really seems to be a backdoor way of trying to get sanctuary city status for our state. If you're telling basically local law enforcement and now sheriffs they can't work with ICE to help ICE do their job, then you're basically saying that this state is a red carpet for somebody to come in here with a criminal history background, and if you happen to be illegal, that's no problem. Come to Massachusetts and you'll be protected. And we saw, the most damning thing out there was, and it's called Kate's Law, this bill that's filed down in Congress, that would be to try to get rid of the sanctuary status because Kate Steinle in San Francisco was killed by a man who had been deported 5 times, had 7 violent criminal arrests made, but kept getting deported, kept coming back, went specifically to San Francisco, as he said in his testimony, because it had a sanctuary city status, and he knew that it would be difficult for law enforcement to track his background while he was there. That's what he said in court after he had killed Kate Steinle on the pier in San Francisco. In the arms of her father, she died. It was a horrific case and a perfect example of why we need to protect our citizens of Massachusetts and actually allow law enforcement officers to do their job.
And so where do things stand with it? Is it just a matter of something that has to be discussed and debated and voted on?
Now,
or
it's come out of Judiciary Committee. It is actually going to be voted on in the House, and if it moves out of the House successfully, it'll go on to the Senate, and ultimately we're going to see if the governor, who has previously stated that he does not want to give Massachusetts a sanctuary status, we'll see if the governor would actually go forward and sign this bill or not. I personally think that it's a mistake, again, not just financially, but also because, what other resource does ICE have as far as being able to work in the communities to make sure that they can do their job, which is to keep our streets safe, keep our state safe, by getting rid of people who are here with a criminal background.
And you look what's going on around the world. I know we're sitting here talking about individuals.
Well, that's the other thing too. And I mean, the bigger issue is, we found out that and I'm sorry, but the Manchester bombing at the Ariana Grande concert is an example of someone who immigrated into the country of the United Kingdom or Britain, England, and did not have the best intents, obviously. And that's the kind of thing you want to prevent. You want to make sure that it's not just illegal immigrants, but also that terrorists don't somehow come in. And we saw this happen on our own shores, right in Boston with the Marathon bombing. The Tsarnaev brothers were given refugee status and came here into Massachusetts, and yet they kept flying back and forth between Massachusetts and Chechnya, the country they said they were refugees from.
Right.
Ultimately, causing the bombing, and we could have done a much better job of making sure that law enforcement had information from federal officials to know that they were actually going back and forth to their country, even though they were refugees. We should have known that. We should have been able to put a flag on that and stop that before it happened.
We got less than 5 minutes left. Can you believe it? Less than 5 minutes. Where did the time go?
Where's it go?
Anything we haven't touched upon, but you want to at least take a couple of moments to chat about, or even if you want to talk proudly about your daughters, who I see are making the news every time I turn around, whether they're hosting a show or
right. Look out, my 11-year-old,
world famous cheerleader.
Yeah, no. Well, my 11-year-old was a co-host with some other girls for the Conley annual talent show. She had a great time doing that. Wow. Saw a lot of great talent on that stage. So look out, world. Whitman and Hanson certainly have a lot of great kids, and so she hosted that, and she just turned 11 recently too. She's a great kid, and
fast.
And she's actually just finishing up at Conley. This is her last year, so she goes on to Whitman Middle School. Yeah, where does that time go?
Yeah. They grow so fast. I like that.
And then my freshman daughter, my oldest, Kaylee, who's 15, is a freshman this year, actually finishing up her freshman year. She had an incredible first year. I mean, we had a great year sports-wise for Whitman anyway. I mean,
sure.
the men's basketball team did incredibly well.
Sure.
But the cheerleaders did really well in addition. They won not only regionals, right, this region of the state, they also ended up winning states in the winter. They ended up winning New England regionals, and they went to Dallas and ended up winning states. So my daughter just got her ring the other day. The cheerleaders all got their Jostens ring, and very proud to have a championship team in her freshman year. So they can never take that away, right? So always have that. But I think the girls cheerleading team has always been a powerhouse. They've won states, 5 years prior in a row. They look to be a solid team going forward, and I think it's just great, not just my children, but a lot of the children in our towns. You just have a wonderful chance to excel in a lot of the sports, and we have towns that really celebrate that, and it's nice. East Bridgewater's football team came up to the State House recently. They were recognized for their win in the Super Bowl. State champs.
Wow.
I mean, and
that's coming off of the year prior, where it was a heartbreaking loss, right?
Well, yes.
The year prior.
I was at that Super Bowl the year before.
I was watching go
it
back
came
and
down
forth.
to basically the last possession.
Oh my goodness!
Unbelievable. Girls soccer for East Bridgewater also won championships. We are a championship region, and we don't even know it sometimes, right? So it's great to celebrate those kids' successes here at the State House, and I think it's just been a district. The 3 towns of Abington, Whitman, East Bridgewater, just very lucky to represent very responsible towns that always put, I think, their fellow citizens first, and always been proud to be able to do what I can up on Beacon Hill to help them.
And if your constituents want to reach out and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking, or somebody wants to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, so again, there's 2 different websites now. There's one which is dealforsenate.com, not org, dealforsenate.com, and then there's geoffdiehl.com as well, and that's got links to my Facebook page, Twitter page. If you wanted to, weigh in or just email me, there's a link there as well. So either one of those websites would work, and I'd be happy to get in touch with you and talk to you as usual. I mean, I know summer's coming and people have vacation plans, but I'm always available to talk and go out. And I think the concert season's coming soon, and I know you'll be taping some shows, and I'll be out there. I think with lollipops again.
Yeah, and I'll be wearing my shirts that I got from the Whitman Cultural Council that I purchased when they had those.
They have the coolest shirts lately, right?
Oh my God, they are so fantastic.
Yeah.
But, sir.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you very much for coming back and doing your program. 7th Plymouth District, CrossTalk here on Whitman Hanson Community Access. Hey, until next time,